What's up, everybody? Today we are going deep into shoulders, posture. We're going to talk a little bit about tendinopathy and a lot of things just really about performance and how you can better yourself. We got Phil here for Physio Friday. Here we go. All right, tribe. It's good to be back. My name is Yanni Bormeister. If we haven't met, along with Rad and Richard, we are the founders of Unity Gym and the UMS. And it's Friday, so I have my great friend Phil White, aka Switched On Physio. And the reason why he is switched on because he is one of the best. How you going, mate?
Good. Nice to be here. It's really exciting being in the gym. It was really nice walking into the gym and having like the black plastic off the windows. There's sunlight in the gym again. It's just things. It feels like things are looking up.
Things are looking up. That's
the
right.
The virus is still very much at large.
That's right. As long
it
as
feels nicer.
As long as we don't spread it around too much in the protests on the weekend that we're about to have, then we should be okay to open again. We'll see. I don't want to be too controversial.
Yeah, but no, it's been a good week. Pleased to be here. I'm feeling a bit worse for wear after falling off my mountain bike a few times. Now I'm getting back into it, hitting the Manly Dam trails. Got all the way up to like the top of this sandstone kind of little mini cliff that I'd ridden up, but my gears don't go down to the lowest gear. So I got to the top and then just couldn't get over this tiny little rock that was my way, and then fell backwards off a cliff and just smashed my arm up against a against a rock. So feeling a bit sore leaning on my arms here on this beautiful table, but
yeah,
it's been a good week, and I'm keen to be
suck it up. Suck it up.
I love a bit of mountain biking.
All right. Well, look, we've got a couple of really cool things to talk about. Now, the main topic of discussion that came through in a personal email to Phil, so I can't build context around that. I'm going to let Phil do that himself in regards to a shoulder issue. We've also had probably one of the most common things that people ask us questions about, which is usually medial or lateral epicondyle.
It's almost medial.
Medial, like, you think,
yeah. It really seems to be related to like the grip work that all of these Keen Bean calisthenics Unity members seem to love so much, and so it's really.
So this one was medial epicondylitis, which is of course golfer's elbow, aka tendinopathy in the. Usually the epicondyle.
There he goes, yes. Medial epicondyle is the inside of your elbow here, and that's a really common place because it's your sort of flexor tendons, which is really involved with grip and pulling. So another question, that one came through from Alan Zuckerman, and I did kind of address it a little bit on my own little show yesterday, and we'll have a quick chat about it, but I think because it is a topic that we talk about so often that we'll maybe direct you just to some past
resources.
Discussions.
Yeah, that's right. We don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of tendinopathy again today because it's a hot topic and we talk about it a lot.
Excited, with a new project that I'm working on with exercise rehab programs. Going to be putting together a medial epicondyle with my new business partner. So that's going to be our first project. So we'll be getting plenty of good stuff out there for you.
Awesome.
To
Good stuff. Okay, so very quickly, we got a couple of people on the live stream. As you guys know, if you're listening on the Sound of Movement podcast or watching the replay on YouTube, we do stream these live to our UMS Movement Mastermind private Facebook group. Anyone can join as long as you agree to abide by the code of conduct. Jump on over to Facebook, search for UMS Movement Mastermind. We got Aidan Potts, Craig Jenkins, Jada. Thank you very much, Jada. It is good to be back, albeit a little bit of a voice change while I get over this chest thing. But yeah, it is good to be back.
Yeah, and thanks, Aidan, for getting a question in there early. We would love some questions today because I've been kind of answering a lot of the physio questions on my own little 3 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time show. So we'd love to. We have plenty of time to answer your questions, and this week's is a good one to ask them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna finish, Aidan. So stick around because I'm gonna finish talking about your question specifically because I have a very, very personal experience with posture correction after sort of 16 years of boxing and just all round bad posture growing up. So. Stick around to the end because that's going to tie in after our discussion on shoulders. So why don't we get started just quickly dipping our toe into the tendinopathy rabbit hole.
Okay.
And we'll get through that real quick, and then we'll get into our shoulder discussion today.
Yes, this one came through from a new member on the UMS Mastermind group called Alan Zuckerman. He says he's a 55-year-old athletic fit with chronic medial elbow pain that is ongoing for at least 8 months now. Obvious injury that started from various assisted simple pulling routines from the rings. I've tried resting the elbow for some weeks and various daily physio exercises as well over the months, but nothing has worked. No real pain to speak of daytime and nighttime. When I'm working out, my screen's going crazy, hang on. However, I immediately get pain any kind of pulling exercises, push-ups, hanging from a bar, and instant pain. For example, if I extend my arm, lay my hand flat on the wall, and try and push away with my fingers, with really no body weight pushing against the wall. The origin seems to be the finger tendons. I work out almost daily, generally body weight, flexibility stuff, and yoga. The pain is always right at the tendon insertion point at the elbow, nowhere else. My wrist flexibility is good, and I do plenty of wrist strengthening exercises. I never go past a 4, max 5 out of 10 when working out pain, and the pain goes away within an hour of working out. Any help appreciated. All right. So that's a good amount of information to work from. Again, just remember that with these Physio Friday shows, like, this isn't a consultation, so I can't formally diagnose. So we're just working off the assumption that
that you have the diagnosis.
You do
right.
in fact have medial elbow tendinopathy.
Yeah.
So, and this is general information for you to
Quick
work
disclaimer.
with. But yeah, it's not a specific exercise prescription, or we're not. You're not in my care as a physio. But yeah, the things to kind of point out from this particular case is that when it's got to the point where it's going for 8 months, that's a sign that it's like going to be harder to get out of this, because if it's only been there for a short time, it's quite likely that you'll be able to get rid of it fairly quickly. But the longer it sort of sticks around, you've just got to get in that mindset that it's probably going to take a bit longer.
The more time
to get
that the collagens and the protein have had time to break down, and
and I mean, part of it is the morphological changes in, so basically like the actual changes in the structures of the body, but also with pain signs, it's more than just those morphological changes. It's so much about your association now with pulling is that, like, before you go to do any pulling now, you're going to be a bit worried, and that threat, that perceived threat, is going to then increase any type of signal that you get from that area, which is going to amplify the then pain you feel. So it's more than...
Can we just stop for a second? I want you guys to really take a moment to just digest what Phil said, because it's a huge insight for anyone who's ever been injured and anyone who's suffering from any sort of injury or pain at the moment. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
Basically, like with, it's very tempting to always just think about what's
when
happening
an injury's
in the body.
been going for a long time. This is more specific too.
Yeah,
I think.
exactly. So with all that we've talked about with pain science in previous shows, basically we know that there's a big, the brain is 100% the thing that is experiencing pain, and the things that influence that pain is the signal that you're getting from your body, but also how you're processing it. And pain can kind of be summarized as perceived threat. So if you've had an injury that's very entrenched and has been there for a long time, then you sort of start to get that, you can kind of catch yourself when you go to do a thing that has hurt you in the past, you're now going to be expecting that pain, and that's going to be amplifying basically any signal that you're getting from that area. So I just want to break that down for the people who don't understand as much about pain science. What Phil's suggesting there is that he's not saying that you're not injured or there's not an issue there that needs to be dealt with and you should just ignore it. What he's saying is, because of the previous history and how long it's been going on for, it kind of almost has its own pathway where it amplifies the pain much more than you should really be feeling. Just to be really specific, it what's happening is you're amplifying the signal, which is not a pain signal, but a information signal from that area, which then is processed and is expressed as pain.
It's expressed as
you're
more
still
pain than there should be.
Yeah, so it's not like you're turning up and down the pain at the source. You're getting the same signal, but then what your brain processes comes as pain. Yeah. And so the important distinction there is that it's not something that you can... If you just change what's happening in the elbow, that doesn't mean that it'll change the pain. It's if you sort of rub the area or whatever, you do these sort of... I've been talking a bit about diffuse noxious inhibitory control, which is why it feels better to, if you hit your head, to rub it a bit, because you start blurring that signal. So basically you can kind of cloud that signal, and then the body doesn't process the pain as much.
I have a question. Because I've always wanted
Love
to know
questions.
what this, I've seen people before, and I've seen them sold at chemists for tennis and golfer's elbow. You can get those straps that
Yes.
strap around the forearm, and there's like a little plastic thing that presses into a part that you choose to focus on. What is that? How is that helping? Because people often say, "Oh, it helps when I use this strap,"
Yeah, I think it kind of comes down to two things. So generally what we do with it is you put it just below the area of pain.
Yep.
So in this case with the medial elbow, that's the attachment site for your wrist flexor tendons. So what you're doing is by putting it slightly below, applying a firm pressure, it's almost like it's changing the origin site of that muscle. So now that muscle's kind of got now this sort of like stabilized point off the actual tendon, so that when you're doing your flexion, now it's like instead of this bony attachment, now you've got this like compressed muscular attachment, which is sort of changing the origin site almost.
Yeah, right.
Which
because I think I feel like there's a connection there. I'm trying to draw some sort of connection to this whole pain science thing.
Yeah, this is my second point. Is that like basically when it's a very human, natural, like animals do it. We all like if we hurt ourselves, we'll rub the area, we'll press the area, we'll do something because that's changing the signal that then is getting processed by our brain. And because we've got control over that signal by being able to change the pressure, doing that thing. The way our brain works is now that's not a threatening thing anymore because we're in control, and that is why you're no longer feeling that kind of pain. But when it's this, you're getting all this signal that your brain's like, oh, why, pulling is the devil, pulling did this to me, so I can't pull anymore. Then it's that lack of control, that perceived threat is ramped up, and therefore it's going to be stuck around for a bit longer.
So could we draw a conclusion or use that as an example for the people out there who are trying to understand how this pain science really works, that strapping this thing around your wrist that does absolutely nothing, around your forearm usually, that does absolutely nothing to change the tissue or the injury. It's not reducing inflammation. It's not healing. It's not creating a healing response. It's just kind of almost like distracting you from the injury.
Well, that's why I said there was kind of two parts to it. Part of it is that, but also part of it is trying to biomechanically change the origin point of that muscle to change the amount of force it's then put in through there.
Right.
That's why it can be quite a useful tool for the short term for both of those things to just, facilitate you to do the exercise. But then you see those, those old blokes who walk around with that, like the similar thing underneath their kneecap forever. And that's like they permanently wear that because that's like, now that's become like a crutch. It's like when people get put into orthotics and they just keep wearing orthotics for their whole life. Or, it's like it should be used in the short term to facilitate loading and then stop using it.
So, perfect.
So hopefully that kind of all makes a bit of sense.
I know we went out in the weeds there a little bit, guys, but the reason why I wanted to reinforce that point is to do with the fact that one of the worst things that you can do when you get injured is to stop exercising, and it's very easy to do that because you have this instinctual. Well, we've been programmed by our parents, by maybe the healthcare professionals that we've grown up with, that when you hurt yourself or you get sick, you need to rest. And in many, many cases with an injury like tendinopathy, it's not the best course of treatment. The best course of treatment is to adapt your workouts to focus on the tendinopathy, not the goal that you had before. And often your goal has to sort of change a little bit, and that's where people fall over. People go, okay, I identify that I've got a tendinopathy, but I'm still going to go to the gym and train for my muscular hypertrophy or max strength goal and hope that the tendinopathy doesn't prevent me from achieving it.
And that's where you have to get so like creative as physios to try and, because like you can give a tendinopathy program that, is an optimal sort of one for a robot who doesn't have human nature kind of in their ear. But if that perfect sort of program is not in line with that person's goals, or you can't figure out a way of getting them buy in, they're not going to do it. So I like to talk to people who have this particular issue and tell them, now's a great time to focus on your legs. Now's a great time to focus on your, that middle splits goal that you wanted. And then just like do the work with your tendinopathy, get past that, and then start bringing back in the goals.
And I think, I don't want to give him that much credit while he's stitched me up and made me take over the show for him this morning, but that is one of the things that Rad is remarkably good at doing, is pivoting very quickly. The moment he senses that there's an issue or an injury in his body, he's far superior at doing this than I am. He will pivot, and you'll see him go and do a full shoulder rehab program, sometimes too much, I think, he will do
He's
like
the robot I was referring to.
8 weeks of a shoulder rehab program, despite his goal of doing a planche or something, and he's able to pivot his goal so quickly to, okay, I'm just going to focus on overcoming this issue. I know it's going to set my other goal back a few months, but I don't care because I know how bad this can get. And I do know a lot of people that do that really, really well. Then you've got the other end of the spectrum, which is me, who just tries to push through until it basically floors me, and that's how I think most people probably go about things, So we won't go too much deeper on that. We got a lot of great resources on Golfer's Elbow on our YouTube channel even, and Phil's saying that he's developing a great program. We'll keep you posted on that as well.
One thing that just with that, focus your goals to maybe your lower body or something else, but keep trying to train your upper body. But you can use ways to, like he's pointed out here, that things that really aggravate him is putting his arms out in the wall and then trying to push off with his fingers. And basically when you go into that wrist extended position, like that's going to be stretching the joint, and then trying to activate the joint from a stretch position we know is much harder than activating a neutral position. So I really recommend for people who are suffering with this issue to just try and adapt their wrist position, because I think you mentioned that there was he thinks it's his finger flexors, which is right, because a lot of people think like, oh, it's my elbow, so therefore it's like just my elbow pulling bicep curls, pull-ups, that kind of stuff. But really it comes down to what's happening in the wrist, because they're the wrist muscles that are attaching up here. So by getting your wrist into neutral position, I like to recommend people who often, people have those kind of like mini dumbbells that people use for like walking along. That used to be in all the rage in the aerobics days. The little 1 or 2 just those like dumbbells. Little 1 or 2 kilo dumbbells are great to use as especially if they're hex ones where they've got a nice stable surface. Great for using to do push-ups. So if you can keep your wrist in that neutral position, that's just a way of like functionally deloading those that particular structure while you can still heavily load the rest of your upper body, which and same with if you're doing pulling, instead of being in supinated position and getting a good bicep pump, coming into that neutral position and just sort of changing things up a bit so you can start to share the load a bit.
Now very quickly, I just want to check in with the comments that we've got here. Carmine is saying, back in the fold, Yanni, with a painful pirate patch. Yeah, absolutely.
He's got the moody black hat over the eyes.
That's right. Would like to hear Phil's opinion of wearing knee sleeves regularly. Lee Clements, this goes back into sort of what we said before. I mean, if there's a specific reason for it, then it might be okay. I've got lots of friends that wear knee and elbow sleeves just because they are lifting stupid amount of weight, which has a high probability of overuse injury or injury in and of itself, and that compression on the joint helps to mitigate that risk. You just want to have a really good reason. What are your takes on it?
I'm less worried about knee sleeves because like the things that we have talked about quite a lot with like the, I guess in this example with the tendinopathy like compression straps or orthotics, these are all biomechanically changing how that joint or structure works, and it's kind of adding a crutch to that area that means that the structures that your body needs that are naturally there no longer have to work, and they become weaker, they atrophy, and you don't get the you'll never get stronger because those are doing part of the job. And it means that you become really reliant on them if you take them away. Whereas the knee sleeve, not so worried. It's not doing much. Like it's really not doing much. It's adding a tiny amount of compression. It's kind of warming up your knees a bit. Like
it's almost more a placebo effect with knee sleeves. Like it does do a little bit. Don't get me wrong, but if you've ever seen a power lifter lift with compression straps.
Yeah,
Around
it's
the
a whole
knee
nother-
straps, like they literally are in it's excruciatingly painful. So and that certainly changes the game.
Yes.
You know, that creates a lot of compression, a lot of stability,
Yeah.
and it changes the shearing force in the knee a lot.
But-
What you need to understand is that the knee sleeves don't do that at all. You
No.
know, like it's minuscule, and I don't really have much of a problem with it. I have my take on knee sleeves and compression and weight belts and everything. There is always inherently a risk when you lift heavy. You can't escape it, you know. And exercise, as much as I hate to admit it, exercising regularly at a very high intensity, you do suffer a level of wear and tear. I believe 110% that it is much better than not exercising. The types of de-evolving that the body goes through, I don't know if I can say that as a word. I know devolving is a word, but maybe the wrong use. Your body devolves if you... It is a word. You can look it up. It is a word.
It's not de-evolve, it's devolve.
Devolve, yeah, okay.
syllables in there.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we weigh up that risk versus reward, and we choose, yes, definitely exercising. And for me, lifting heavy is certainly something I want to do. But there is a wear and tear that your body has to deal with, and there is a risk. And so I am a strong believer that you should be wearing a weight belt when you lift heavy, and you should... Yeah, you know, there's nothing wrong with wearing knee sleeves and squat shoes. You know, lifters are another thing. People go, oh, you should squat bare feet. Well, yeah, squatting bare feet is very beneficial, but there's also benefits to lifting with squat shoes, you know, and that's my take on it. Cool, let's move on. Okay, shoulders. Come on, we've only got like 5-10 minutes.
Yeah. And just on this, Jada's got a comment saying, I can relate to wearing a wrist widget when I tore my TFCC a few months ago. I had to overcome the fact that my wrist was okay and I needed to start strengthening again. Yeah, that's exactly right. With these things, they can just become a bit of a crutch and people become really reliant on it. And it's so important to, start getting out of them.
Can you build some context around shoulder with your email? Of not naming any names.
Yeah. So this is from Paul. It's a private email, so I won't go the full name, but I'll let him know that we've answered it here. He says he's been dealing with shoulder pain and hoping it gets better. Went to a doctor and had x-rays. Came back with a diagnosis of shoulder tendinosis, which is very interesting because you can't see tendons on an x-ray. And
sorry, repeat that again. I missed
so
that.
he says he went to a doctor and had an x-ray. It came back with his diagnosis of shoulder tendinosis, which I find really interesting because you can't see tendons on an x-ray. So
you can only see bone on an x-ray, guys.
Yeah.
And maybe a bit of fluid, water, but not really.
So you can see like changing of like joint space. So maybe he's making an assumption from the, like, if he's got, you know, a subacromial impingement, so closing down of the space just below the top shoulder bone in layman's terms, that maybe that's kind of how he's got that diagnosis. But interesting. He says, assuming from years of painting ceilings above my head. Haven't painted in years, but still seems to count. And he basically has a question about whether or not it's the front or the back of the shoulder from a previous podcast that we talked about. He says, honestly, I'm not sure, but the doctor didn't specify and it didn't really help me much. And he didn't help me much except for send me to a massage, which COVID has now stopped. And he says he's been doing the shoulder rehab from Unity Gym.
Which is the thing that the sending to a massage is also a weird thing to do.
This doctor is wild. But
sorry if he's a friend of yours.
Yeah. And he's been doing some self-massage, and he says it feels more painful at the back of the shoulder. He's doing lots of scapular exercises from the Unity YouTube, and he thinks he's starting to gradually progress. Do you feel like it could be a gradual process, and am I okay to keep on training as he has been? He has a whole bunch of other comments here giving more context, but there was one thing that I wanted to... Oh yeah, that's what he says. He says, strange how years after painting it all of a sudden seems to flare up, which is an important thing that I'll get to in a sec. So, big picture sort of stuff here. Interesting that the doctor's saying go and get a massage, and I think that's probably for the, trying to get that kind of postural benefit, because when we've talked a lot about before, when you're trying to achieve overhead mobility, if you're in this sort of rounded posture, Aiden, we'll get to your posture question in a second, it is much harder if you have rounded shoulders and your scapulars are somewhat winging to achieve overhead mobility because of the inefficiencies around the shoulder system in that stage, because the rotator cuff can't control that the movement of the ball in the socket. So I guess that's maybe why the doctor is saying massage. But the best way we can get past this is by building a shoulder system that functions really well, and the best way you can do that is with strengthening, and some mobility. So that's with your question here about do you feel like this is a gradual process? Yes. 100%.
Yes. 100 million %.
Yeah, you just
and I'm going to have a field day with this in a moment when as soon as Phil's finished, because it's something that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah.
But go on.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about how basically you have to embrace the process, and just keep chipping away. And the way that the Unity programs are designed is that it gives you a balance of strength and mobility, and in all the different planes that you need. So that horizontal push-pull, vertical push-pull, and with the straight arm strength really getting to those axioscapular muscles, so the muscles that control our scapula. So if you can be ticking off all those boxes, then that's going to be the way to go. Obviously, this can be a bit challenging for, he's saying he can't do the pike push-ups or pull-ups overhead, because just overhead movement is not great. So we've talked a lot before about trying to work within your available range and then build that available range as you go. So a quick way that you can also help improve your overhead mobility instantly is just by getting better shoulder posture for it. So if you're trying to do your overhead work with your shoulders around like this, try doing some active hangs before you start off. So holding on, pulling your shoulders up, bringing your chest up and your shoulders back and down, and then try and really hold that position as you're doing your pushing and you're doing your pulling in that overhead position, and you'll at least be starting from a stable and strong point. So that's a quick sort of thing you can try that can really help out. But if your shoulders really don't like overhead, then it's going to be training in your available range and do all the overhead mobility stuff in the shoulder rehab program. On this quickly, before Yanni gets unleashed. So with the diagnosis of shoulder tendinosis, so tendinosis, when you already see osis, that basically means like breakdown. And that's what they used to call tendinopathies after they changed it from tendinitis into tendinosis. Now it's tendinopathy. But basically it's that idea of, it's almost like arthritis in your tendons is kind of how they explained it. And so that's just why that word is different there. But now tendinopathy is what we call it. And the reason why sometimes you can have an issue flare up that seems really disconnected from your injury, your old history of painting. So, you're painting for years and years and years and years. During that time, you probably weren't doing a great shoulder strengthening routine. Your shoulders were probably, each time you were painting, really working above their sort of threshold and had that sort of abusive load, which kicks off the tendinopathy pathway. So, and you're probably getting that breakdown in the structure. And if you were to scan your shoulders at that time with an MRI to see the tendon structure itself, they probably looked pretty rubbish. Like, that's one of the things that people get really confused about, is when they're suddenly like looking at, that's why like doctors are often like, hey, you've got this change in your tendon, so this is the problem. When really that problem's been, like, that change in the structure has been there for years. Yeah. Like that's been there for years and years and years, has not caused a problem until suddenly something starts causing issues, and then you go in and get investigative look at the structures in there, and it's like, oh, that doesn't look clean, so therefore that's the issue. But really that even though it's not quite a perfect looking tendon, it's been doing its job. It hasn't been causing any pain whatsoever. So it's just really important to understand that imaging does not equal pain. Yep.
And
does that make sense?
That absolutely, and that's something that it's unfortunately something that we really, as an untrained person, rely on a lot. I used to be like, the moment I had a little bit of pain, I'd be like off to get an MRI. Like literally, I had a fucking tab card, a discount card at the radiology joint down the road. But because I was always fascinated with what was going on.
So it's so important that you don't use like imaging as 100% of your, like, especially if if Paul gets in and gets stuck into his shoulder strengthening program, he really nails it, gradually builds up, gets to achieving overhead stuff, and then goes back to that doctor and he goes like, is my shoulder fixed? And then like, oh, we'll go have we'll scan it again. And it comes back being like, oh, Nah.
No, yeah, that's right. Exactly.
You still got a messy looking tendon, but
Yeah, that's
and therefore
exactly
that
right.
starts to like change that mindset of the person, and they
And
start
then
thinking,
we
oh,
go
maybe
back
I
down
am
the
weak,
pain
and maybe
science rabbit hole.
exactly. So that's
Yep.
one thing that I just really want to make clear with tendinopathy is it's so important to understand that imaging does not equal
Yeah.
like the function and pain.
Yeah, when I lie under or go into the MRI tube, my body looks like I may as well just bury myself now. Like literally, like I've got herniated discs. I got like all sorts of crap going on throughout my spine. I got like last time I had an MRI, to give you an example, guys, last time I had an MRI of an unrelated issue, it came back with a 16 millimeter tear in one of my rotator cuff muscles, and I was like, Jesus, okay, so that's why I'm experiencing that little bit of pain in my shoulder or whatever. I had no clue that I was going to have a huge tear in one of my tendons, and I'm not suggesting that you discredit scans at all, but just be careful
so the
how much
thing I really want to make clear with scans are Rad's. Oh, jeez. Here we go. So Rad's distracting from downtown.
Yeah.
Just getting the show, mate. So yeah, the really key thing that I want to make people understand with scans is they are incredibly useful. They're really good when used appropriately, but they should be used as a confirmatory diagnosis or screening for serious pathologies. So you know, if you like suspect that maybe there's a tumor that's causing the pain, you can scan and be like, hey, that is a tumor. That is good information, and scans are totally appropriate in many situations. And also with diagnosis, confirmatory, if, as a physio, I get someone come in and, they tell me all these, like how the injury happened, how it's been feeling since then, all of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, it could be this structure, it could be that structure. Maybe go get a scan so we can really target your rehab. And then the scan comes back and says, like, it is in fact this one structure, not the other.
Yep.
Then that's a really good use of imaging where we can, where it's used appropriately. But if you just go to a doctor and you have a sore shoulder and they're like, don't ask you any questions, and they're like, okay, let's put you in a scan, see what comes back, then that's just like,
it can be misleading.
Totally misleading.
Yeah. All right. Should I give you my experience with shoulders?
Yeah, go on.
So I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. In my opinion, and this is my opinion, and it's based on, 25 years of training experience personally on myself and about 16 or 17 years of coaching other people. Shoulders are the coolest joint. I love shoulders. They're so versatile. They're capable of doing so many amazing things. Unfortunately, they're also, they can be a very, very vulnerable joint and a very, very strong joint depending on how you treat them. And a lot of that comes down to your posture. A lot of that comes down to the setup, the supporting structures around the shoulder. And I'm talking everything from like feet to skull. If you've got really bad dysfunctional crap going on in your lower body, it's usually going to be reflected in your upper body. And therefore, I really am a firm believer that if you're having issues in the shoulders, that you should just be focusing on becoming a really high functioning human everywhere, and slowly over time, it will sort itself out. The biggest problem is that if you have, like so many of us, we don't grow up swinging from trees anymore. There was just some pretty shocking data released over the last couple of weeks that in the last 35 years, children can jump less high than they could 35 years ago. When Rad and I and Phil and everyone, we were kids, we could jump 1.5 meters. Now kids can only jump 1.3 meters because they're not exercising as much and they're losing muscle mass, and they're
not playing as much.
They're not playing as much. This is the point. They've almost banned monkey bars, and this is a really big problem because we are not getting the stimulation that I believe we need, and we're getting way too much of the wrong stimulus, which is where I'm going to tie this into Aiden's question about posture and sitting down for prolonged periods of time.
Just to pause on that, like stimulation, like it's more than just short term. Like if the kids don't do it now, then they won't have it now, but if they train later, they'll get it back. Like if you look at sort of how bone growth and muscle growth happens over a lifetime, you have like a window. You have a window until you're about, for different parts of your body, and basically until you're about 30, 35 for like developing your bone and muscle mass. And then after that, it's just
It's
flatlining and then dropping off. So
that's exactly right. You know,
the higher you can get your peaks early, the
better.
The better.
Yeah, and that's why it's just so critical. And so, you know, what I want to really reaffirm here is that if you've got shoulder problems and if you're experiencing repetitive shoulder injuries, pain, or something that you just really struggle to solve, and a lot of that is a great marker of that is overhead mobility. I know Phil's had issues with shoulders. I certainly have had issues with shoulders. There is a lot that can get in the way of a high functioning shoulder, and a lot of it is to do with your posture and the structures that support the shoulders, around the shoulders, spine, the ability to extend through the thoracic spine, how tight you are in other areas, even like the lower body, the hips, the lower back, things like that are going to affect the way your shoulders sort of sit and your posture. And the reason why I highlight that is because I do believe, and from personal experience, you can overcome crappy posture, but it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of conscious effort, and it takes a lot of patience along that process, because if you try and force it, you usually end up taking one step forward to take a giant leap backwards. And so what I say to anyone who's trying to improve their overhead mobility that has never had good overhead mobility, if you don't accept that it's going to take years, not months, it's going to take years to get overhead mobility. And if you're above the age of 35, like Phil said, you may never achieve as good overhead mobility as someone who achieves a really good overhead
Just
mobility.
to be really precise about what I was saying with the graphs of like bone and muscle mass. Like those bone changes are very much around bone mineral density. So
Yep.
I'm not as 100% scientifically sure about
Changing
changes
posture,
in posture.
Yeah,
So just
yeah.
be
Look,
quite clear about that.
unfortunately, a lot of physios that you go to, and I've had this myself when I used to have problems, will say no, you can't fix it after a certain amount of time. I've had a lot of people say 28 years old, and then that's it, everything's set. I am a massive. I have disproven that, okay, because I had terribly rounded shoulders. My tipping point was at age 26 when I really badly damaged a shoulder trying to do acrobatics that my shoulders just weren't capable of doing because of my posture. And that was the point when I started to try and fix it. And from 26 until 34, I was working on posture, like consciously looking at myself every time I walked in front of a mirror to go, crap, I'm slouching again. I need to strengthen. And it was about strengthening everything and improving the mobility of everything, not just focusing on my chest.
So this is where I really want to be quite clear with posture, is that there's kind of two ways of thinking about posture. It's the, look at myself in the mirror and think like, oh, I've got to pull myself up into this, carrot up my butt, super upright position, which I think is entirely unhelpful. Really. Doing that, it's just not, it kind of causes its own problems, where now there's this kind of, term in physio where basically you like hypervigilancy is a real issue in itself. So the hypervigilant about trying to pull yourself into something that your body doesn't want to naturally do is going to start causing kind of overuse in structures that aren't kind of used to that.
Yep.
And that hypervigilance also breeds this sort of idea of increased threat and increased issues, basically, where people become scared of bending over. They become scared of being in this position, and then that makes that causes all sort of other issues around being scared of lumbar flexion down the line. So I think this kind of overextender hypervigilancy is really unhelpful, and there's been a lot of research into posture and showing that no one posture is necessarily going to cause any issue from being in that position. But the thing with posture is that it comes from the balance of the muscular system. So if we can, over that time, you were seeing yourself in the mirror and pulling yourself up straight, but at the same time, you're also focusing on strengthening your back muscles. You're focusing on really, going from that kind of bodybuilder boxer mindset of being really chest heavy to then building up strong balanced shoulders, that where you're over that time you were doing more work on
that's right,
changing from that boxer sort of position to
Yep.
being someone who's into.
And also for that period of time, I stopped boxing.
Yes.
I literally at age 30 I stopped boxing altogether and just worked on fixing structural imbalances in my
Exactly.
body.
So the change in posture you got was not from seeing yourself in the mirror and pulling yourself into that position. It was from those changes in instruction. I just want to be really clear about that.
Yep.
Is that people get really like
I
funny.
think the reason why I said that is because I was just trying to reinforce that I was aware of what I was working on. There was focused intent on, okay, I'm no longer going to just focus on how good I look in the mirror here and how hard I can punch like that. I'm going to start focusing on, I was doing lots and lots of study on shoulders and the muscles that support the shoulder. I started to do a lot of trap work, mid, lower, upper trap work. I did a lot of lower back strengthening. So I did a lot of posterior chain contraction, long holds. I got to a point where I could sit in a Roman chair horizontally with my feet anchored and hold a 20-kilo weight plate in front of me for about 90 seconds. You know, like
no joke.
Crazy lower back strength. And now if you look at me, I look like I've got a rounded lower back because of the lumbar erectors, erector spinae, and traps, lats, that insertion is like hypertrophied to the max, you know. Yeah. But I consciously put effort into training my posterior chain. I identified my weaknesses and I put a lot of effort in. Yeah. And it wasn't something that I fixed in a year. Yes. It took about realistically 4 to 6 years. You know, and the thing is, I didn't stop doing anything else. Yeah. I just was like, okay, I'm going to build my training around developing the areas that I've sort of neglected in the past, you know, and what the areas that we worked extremely hard on in boxing were our abs and our chest and our anterior portion of the shoulders, because when we went, I boxed for, I was at the gym for 37 hours a week or running outdoors or something specific to boxing, and we didn't do any strength training except push-ups, ab crunches, and chin-ups. That was it. You know, and so for years and years and years, it was just when we did strength work, it was push-ups, ab crunches, or pull-ups.
And your pull-ups probably looked like...
it was shocking. I think back. And guys, I was training with one of the Australian Olympic coaches, you know, like these guys don't... They train you for boxing and they use old school methods, you know. So... yeah, I just want to say for everyone out there, you can overcome it. I don't care how old you are, you can improve it. You know, you may not end up with perfect posture, but there is no perfect with the human body. It's all 100%. About your perfect, your best effort, what you can get out of your body, you know. And you just have to embrace that it is going to be a process. And you know, the best thing you can do is become process oriented with your training, not outcome oriented. You know, just start to really enjoy turning up and doing the work, and then, you know, celebrate success as you notice them unfold, but don't hunt for the successes.
And I think the way to keep that relevant is when you're doing, you know, again, I keep talking about how much I like the Unity program because it does cover everything so well, and you can just, instead of subbing out your, you know, shoulder workout to just do the shoulder rehab program, for example, or you can just really, you know, put a bit more of a focus on certain parts of the program where, you know, with the pulling exercises, you just put a bit more of a focus onto that, add in some accessory movements with, you know, maybe some targeted rotator cuff strengthening or axioscapular muscle strengthening. Like just a few little changes here and there can just keep you enrolled in the kind of fun program without having to tap out and be like, I'm in rehab land.
Yeah,
I'm in.
Right.
I'm on the rehab island.
This is literally why we spent about 10 years developing the Foundations program. Yeah. The Foundations program is my go-to program to work holistically the entire body to iron out these little imbalances and things like that might be occurring whilst still just developing overall maximal strength and flexibility. You know, it's not a rehab program at all. It's a supremely challenging program. But because of the nature of you working unilaterally, there's a high emphasis on external rotation in the body, extension and development of the posterior chain, which are the muscles that tend to switch off a little bit when we sit in a chair, it just works phenomenally well,
So just before we finish up, I'd love to get to, I feel like I almost planted Craig Jenkins' question here.
Sorry. I'm so sorry to cut you off.
Yep.
I'm so sorry to cut you off. I just want to address what Aidan Potts has asked here. Aidan Potts has just basically invested in a standing desk, which I think is phenomenal. But here's the thing with standing desks. They don't just inherently stop you from slouching. What standing desks do is increase your base caloric expenditure, because standing up, if you just stand up at a desk as opposed to sit down, you burn on average about 200 to 300 more calories a day. And that's what they're really phenomenal for, I think. Because you're working all these little stability muscles that we don't really think about. They all just switch on when we stand up as opposed to sit down. And that little bit of additional muscle contraction throughout the day burns more energy. But Aidan, it doesn't mean that it's going to just fix your posture. In fact, I honestly believe that they can be detrimental to your posture, because you do fatigue the stability muscles when you're standing all day, and you tend to slouch more. I don't know if you've ever watched pay attention to people when they stand at the pub drinking. When you get inebriated from alcohol, you relax more and you tend to slouch more, or you lean on one leg more, and all these things that can actually then create problems. So I love standing desks. I love them because one of our biggest problems is our non-exercise energy thermogenesis, which is the energy we burn when we're not intentionally exercising, is getting lower and lower and lower because of our sedentary lifestyles. So it fixes that problem, but it certainly doesn't just automatically fix the posture problem, which is what you've talked about in your post here. And so I think as long as you think consciously about, we had this craze about a decade ago where everyone was sitting on fit balls, and it was like, sit on a fit ball and it's going to fix all your posture issues. It had the opposite effect. Everyone just slouched more on the fit ball because they're quite hard to sit up straight on, and so like what Phil's saying, the point that Phil made before is spot on, I think, in relevance to moving to a stand-up desk. There are huge benefits to it, but if you're not aware of, the fact that you are going to be working harder, and those muscles will eventually fatigue, and then you're going to slouch, and you may end up experiencing a lot of DOMS and fatigue.
Where I think like the best use of a standing desk is if you can alternate between standing and sitting.
Yep.
Because you will become fatigued if you stand for a long time, and you'll probably end up riding, sitting into one leg more and riding your ITBs, or kind of slouching down in different ways, which again, as I said, like no one posture is bad for short term, but it's that kind of long term thing. So we want to be adding variety to our body. We want to be giving it lots of different stimulus that will, help keep things balanced and not just become, kind of stuck in that one position, like you see those old ladies here.
100%.
Because they've sat in a chair for years. So if you can, set a timer, or you might have like periods where you're like, okay, this is my sitting period, this is my standing period. Start off with standing, and then maybe just for lunch you do an hour of sitting. Like that's fine. Sitting is not the enemy. Like if it's all you do, it's the enemy. But we want that variety in our day. So if you can